Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, March 23rd, 2015, getting on toward the end of the month here. We have oodles of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And let's start off with Ukraine, because there's an interesting situation going on. Poroshenko in Kiev, who is struggling to just hold things together a little bit longer, has requested a police force from NATO and the European Union to act as peacekeepers. But as Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has pointed out, the international laws governing peacekeeping forces require all sides of a conflict to agree for peacekeepers to be there to keep the peace. And obviously the Eastern Ukrainian republics are not interested in that at this particular time. And so basically any forces coming in from NATO and the European Union would not be called peacekeepers. They'd be called an invading horde of pillagers and plunderers. Meanwhile, NATO Commander General Philip Breedlove is saying that all options need to be considered in Ukraine. This guy wants a war because it means promotion and money and toys to play with here. As my wife was pointing out, Breedlove, Strangelove, maybe twins separated at birth. But we know that the people for whom war is their business and the mass murder of our own kind is what they make their money on. Yeah, they want the war to go forward. We got to get the war. War's big business here. Now, there's a new development. This is in the Ukrainian media, and so far has not been commented on over here. There is another region in Ukraine, and I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but let me just try and get this out. Dnipropetrovsk, or Dnipropetrovsk region of the Ukraine. And apparently it is starting to show indications that it, too, wants to break free from the junta in Kiev. And, of course, Kiev has now issued an ultimatum to this region to totally disarm or face consequences. And so it looks like more regions of Ukraine are struggling to break free of Kiev. And this is a whole new model for this covert overthrow strategy the U.S. has been following since the end of World War II, because up until Ukraine, the model was the U.S. goes into a country, overthrows the elected government, installs a dictator, and the rest of the country would just follow the new government like they followed the own. But Ukraine has broken the pattern. The Ukrainians have said, okay, you've got Kiev. Doesn't mean we have to follow along. And that's what led to Crimea voting to secede, the Eastern Ukrainian republics declaring their independence, and now this new one. And the captured territories are whittled away until all that the U.S. puppet regime has is that capital city, which without the surrounding agriculture and manufacturing really isn't worth a whole heck of a lot. Now, speaking of Ukraine, there's been a new development regarding the Clinton email scandal. Not the email scandal, her charitable foundation, which is widely presumed to actually be a campaign slush fund for 2016. And apparently Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk, who was openly a supporter of Ukraine's European integration, the coup d'etat against the elected government and the installation of Poroshenko, was pouring huge amounts of money into Hillary Clinton's charity while she was Secretary of State. And it just basically says, was Hillary Clinton's decision-making as Secretary of State being influenced by these donations to her charitable foundation? Well, we know there's a huge amount of money that went in there from foreign sources. How can that not influence her decision-making? It's why when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, all top officials, not just the president, but all top appointed officials, all members of Congress, have to have their personal wealth in a blind trust so that their decision-making is not influenced by decisions they make, by the decisions they make for the entire country, how it impacts their own personal wallet and portfolio. Because we know when the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008 collapsed, Congress was voting through TARP not to revive the economy for the American people, but to protect their own stock portfolio because they were invested in those Wall Street firms that were making money with this scam. Now, report out of Sputnik News saying that the U.S. is doing everything they can to prevent the rise of a new Russian superpower. And basically what they're saying is the U.S. and NATO have been bringing more and more countries into the American sphere of influence, make them all loyal allies. So far, so good. Russia doesn't want to play along with that. And as long as Russia insists on being independent of American hegemony, there's going to be a conflict, because remember, all the way back in the 1990s, there was this group, this policy group, the Project for the New American Century, and their political agenda was, with the United States being the sole remaining superpower on Earth following the collapse of the Soviet Union, let's act like it and bring the whole world underneath our system of government. And we can see how well that is working out. What is really interesting, though, is this article is commenting on how the U.S. is focused on Russia, and they're basically pulling back on China. Remember, China is also on the special high-interest targets list because of the yuan and the renminbi. But at the moment, U.S. is pulling back from China. And what I read from this is the U.S. government is finally realizing our military, for all the money that's been poured into it, is already stressed. Stockpiles are drawn down. This whole world conquest was supposed to be over in 2008. We're now in 2015, and now the U.S. is having to pick and choose their battles. And they're de-emphasizing China, and it looks like Obama is trying to de-emphasize Iran in order to focus the available military resources on a potential conflict in Russia. Now, what this tells us is if the world were to unite against the United States the way the world united against Nazi Germany, the U.S. is going to lose. And that is another reason to not let this war agenda move forward. Meanwhile, the U.S. is moving some U.S. troops and equipment along a 1,700-kilometer convoy from Estonia to Germany, all on the ground. And it is a major display of U.S. power, to the point where there are now complaints from other countries, including the Czech Republic, declaring it a shocking spectacle in keeping with U.S. imperialistic ambitions. Big, huge parade of soldiers and artillery marching across Europe. Now, here's an interesting story out of IntelliHub. Yemen being driven to the edge of civil war. Actually, I think it's pretty much already there, and more to the point, it's almost over and done with. Because what we have is another country that was laboring under a U.S. puppet ruler, kicking that U.S. puppet out. And apparently it's not going well over there, maybe because of the need to prioritize military forces. The U.S. and Great Britain are pulling their people out. The entire U.S. staff from Yemen has been pulled out, according to the State Department. And State Department spokesman Jeff Rathke said, we will continue to engage the Yemeni people, and the international community strongly support Yemen's political transition. We'll continue to actively monitor terrorist threats, blah, 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 blah. And today we had on Fox News saying both Al-Qaeda and ISIS are now in Yemen. So they're trying to figure out a way they can get you to go along with the U.S. having to go back into Yemen, reconquer those people, and place them back under U.S. puppet rule. So, Jeff, if you really feel that strongly about it, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. Watch your head climbing into the transport plane, and we'll call Yemen and tell them you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. The rest of us, we're going to stay home and keep our kids safe. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back soon. We got a caller waiting on the line. We'll be back after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And finishing up with Yemen before we take phone calls here. As you know, Yemen has been rocked by terror attacks against a museum, because we know how strategically, militarily important museums really are. They were basically PR stunts. Oh, there's terrorism in Yemen. We've got to go in and fight ISIS. And the leader of the Houthi fighters is saying these terror attacks are being carried out by the United States and Israel in order to justify a military intervention. like we hadn't already figured that out for ourselves, but it's a little confirmation. All right, we're going to grab a few phone calls here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hi.
Yeah, that convoy was like a joke. You might have thought it was serious if they had any armor in there going through Czechoslovakia, but it was just a joke to try to. It's a PR stunt too, you know. Like it's getting ridiculous. You know, the Russians ain't laughing though.
Well, I think the Russians are actually laughing a little bit, but they realize that the U.S. is trying to gin up a new European war, and the Europeans are getting more and more concerned about how ready the United States government is to inflict another major conflict on their territory.
Yeah, you wonder. I mean, people need to realize the reason they want Ukraine, making deals with Cuba and Iran. It's all about debt expansion. That's it.
That's one of the reasons. It's also control over resources, control over the international currency, although that appears to be slipping. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show. But again, wars are never fought for a single reason. When you get a whole bunch of people who have their own agendas and they're all accomplished by going to war, that's when the war happens. And the reason for going to war by the United States may not be the same reason that Israel wants to go to war or NATO wants to go to war, but it doesn't really matter. As long as they all agree war is going to solve their problems, the war is going to move forward, and that's what's happening right now.
Well, that's how Russia and China can, throw some ice on their flame there, because, if you think about it, that if you have multiple agendas, then they're not on the same page. You make a lot more mistakes. And you can see with the Asian Development Bank and the Russians got their own SWIFT system, and you combine these two, that you're getting it from multiple fronts. And the U.S., at this point, you can see the writing on the wall. I mean, look, Luxembourg's joining the bank system, and if South Korea does, it's game over.
Well, the IMF is now going to be cooperating with the Asian Development Bank, and again, I want to get into this in detail when we're talking about the economy, but now the U.S. is saying, all right, we're going to have to learn how to coexist with this Asian Development Bank, and that means the days of either or the dollar are now officially over. And so in that regard, there's definitely been a major blink from Wall Street and Washington, D.C.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I just can't see them wanting to go to a multipolar world when they're so used to having a unipolar world for such a long time.
Well, they don't want to go to that. They wanted to preserve the unipolar world centered on the United States, but they're finally waking up and realizing the only way they can do that is to literally declare war on the rest of the planet, and they know that they cannot take that through to fruition. If the rest of the world unites against the United States of America, the U.S. is going to lose. They're already having to pick and choose their next coming battle. And so that whole war agenda is, in fact, already falling apart. The U.S. cannot prevail against the rest of the world united.
No, we couldn't even win if we went after the Russians without the Chinese getting in. I mean,
we haven't been able to hang on to Afghanistan, Iraq, or Libya. I mean, that's how bad it is.
And those are just those aren't really a trained army. This is like a first world trained army. I mean, you're going up a whole different.
You're going up against the varsity is what you're doing, yes.
Exactly. And on that, if the multipolar world is going to crush us, though, because of who's going to want to use the dollar? China's got all the manufacture of the world. I mean, if you have a basket of currency, say, everybody's going to go with the renminbi.
They are. If you accept a yuan or renminbi or a ruble in trade, you can take it back to that country and actually buy something of value. U.S. products, manufacturing's been in decline. Our products are now world-renowned for poor quality and high prices, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture right now. The U.S. is in a heck of a corner, and it was put there by corporate greed and government complicity.
And don't forget about India. A lot of people forget about India. They got a population that's bigger than China, so there's a lot of consumers between China and India.
Well, they don't have a lot of disposable income over there. Anyway, listen, Dustin, I need to let you go, and we're going to switch over here to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing good for a Monday.
Well, I've been looking at the news, and the Czech government is asking the people not to throw rotten eggs and tomatoes at these troops that are parading through their country. And
I agree with that. There's a food shortage right now. You don't want to waste that good food on those American troops marching through.
No. They've got a surplus because of the sanctions on Russia.
I stand corrected. All right, go ahead and throw rotten eggs and vegetables at the troops then.
I think it would be more productive to throw Molotov cocktails, really.
I don't want to go there. I really don't want to go there because rotten eggs and tomatoes. That's a protest protected under the First Amendment. I think Molotov cocktails crosses the line there.
But anyway, according to what I've been reading today, the Russian economy has suddenly perked up much earlier than expected. Bloomberg is reporting quite a rapid turnaround in the Russian economy. And I suppose
the sanctions have hurt the U.S. and Canada and Venezuela and Europe a lot more than they hurt Russia. It was a very poorly thought out tactic. And it didn't work, and because our government can never admit error, they're going to keep on saying, yes, we're going to keep the sanctions. They're not working. They're hurting us more than hurting them, but we're going to prove we're tough enough to take it.
And I'm looking at this thing with Congress and the sanctions on Iran.
Yes.
Well, all I can say about that is U.S. sanctions on Iran, if the Congress insists on perpetuating them beyond the resolution of this nuclear stand-up between the U.S. and Iran, if that resolution if it comes forward, then Europe and Britain will jump in and take all the contracts before the American business community can make a move.
That's exactly right. If Congress votes to keep the sanctions, despite a P5+1 agreement, and they have a veto-proof majority, the only country that will be harmed by those sanctions will be the United States, because the rest of the world is just going to go right on doing business with Iran. Peace through commerce. John, I got to let you go here. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we've got some warplanes buzzing around outside the window over Pearl Harbor. Before we take some more phone calls, I want to talk about what's going on down in Israel, because it should be obvious to everybody that Israel's invulnerability to global criticism is definitely fractured right now. And institutions and governments and individuals around the world are now feeling that they have a greater freedom to stand up and say, look, this is what the government of Israel is doing wrong, and not be met with shouts of you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater. Because we maintain there's a line. We're criticizing the actions of a government. We're not bashing on people for their religion or for their ethnic background. It is the behavior that is the issue. So the European Union has just issued their own report about illegal settlement building in eastern Jerusalem, and basically saying they're condemning Israel for going ahead with this in violation of numerous United Nations resolutions, and basically saying that this is the cause for the violence being as high as it is, that Israel persists in stealing land it does not own to build illegal settlements that are illegal under international law. Now, another non-governmental organization, the Global Movement for the Defense of Children in Palestine, has said Israel has shot 30 Palestinian children this year so far. And so it just keeps on going. And on the front of whatreallyhappened.com, we have this horrible, horrible picture of a Palestinian child who was hit with white phosphorus during one of Israel's recent military adventures. And he is scarred for life, and it's a very hard picture to look at, but you should, because this is what Israel is doing. And for them to be up at the United Nations saying that they shouldn't be put on the United Nations list of nations that abuse children is nonsense when you look at that picture. Now, there's a big debate coming up at the Security Council regarding the rights of Palestine. And for the very first time, the U.S. delegation says they will not be taking the floor to speak about Israel and Palestine. And this is an indication that U.S. blanket support for Israel is on the wane, and it's nice to finally see some spine from the White House. Israel's response is that if the United States isn't going to be there to take the hardballs on their behalf, they're just not going to show up at all. See, we're going to stay home. You can talk bad about us all you want. We're not going to be there to listen to it. Acting like a bunch of spoiled brats. Finally, a story out of Russia Today. Obama confirms evaluating options after Netanyahu's no Palestinian state pledge. Netanyahu's put himself in a corner because he came out and said all these very racist things, declaration of no Palestinian state to win his election, and now he's at odds with the White House. Netanyahu is now trying to go back to saying he supports a two-state solution, but that's telling all of his backers in Israel that he was lying to them to get elected. And by the way, John McCain is out there defending Netanyahu's racist comments against Arabs and statements about Palestine, saying, look, you should understand you just don't hold politicians to anything they say during a campaign. Let me repeat that. John McCain is excusing Netanyahu's racism by saying that voters should never hold anything a politician says during a campaign as being some kind of a fact. And I hope the voters in Arizona remember that the next time McCain is up for re-election. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. John in Hawaii, aloha, bra, what's up?
Hey, hi, Michael. I just want to say, anyone who's new listening to you, you really are a resource and I'm just so happy that you're out there. I mean, I look at your news stuff every day just to keep track of what's going on. And you're usually right on, really, completely, and it's just like amazing. Mm-hmm. But I just want to let you know I'm vice president of Hawaii Organic Farmers Association. I'm really trying to encourage people to start planting food. I mean, if they haven't already, obviously they should have started planting a few years ago. And we're doing a soils and community building workshop over at the Key Project on Oahu on Saturday, and I just want to invite you and any other your listeners to come over and support us. We're going to be putting in the garden and showing people how to work with the degraded soil over here in Hawaii. You know, we've been exploited really horribly by the plantations, and the university system and everything like that has just been criminal with their support of genetically modified organisms, really poisoning our people over here. And it's really important that people find out how much fun, how good it is, and how much people can learn about themselves and their relationship with this planet just by getting their hands dirty and planting a little food. And so I just want to let people know the Hawaii Organic Farmers Farming Association is going to be trying to put in gardens all around the islands and trying to encourage people to grow our own food. You know,
do you have a website? Do you have a website?
Yeah, they can go to the Hawaii Organic Farmers Association, or people can Farming Association, HOFA. If they just type in HOFA, it'll take them to that, and it'll give them all that information. And I also have a website where I have PDFs on how to grow papayas organically, and also how to grow anything. It's about 20-something pages on a growing guide for organic farming, applicable to anybody in the country, really, but specifically for Hawaii. And that's at supernaturalagriculture.net. supernaturalagriculture.net, and that'll give them all the information and let them see what we're doing over here in Coleman. I've got 20 acres of organic production going on over here. And,
okay, John, would you email me those URLs, and I will post them on whatreallyhappened.com so that people can find them without worrying about a spelling mistake or anything like that, okay?
All right, sure, yeah, and you're welcome to even download the PDF on the Hawaii Growing Guide, because I think this is the kind of information people need. It's about 20 pages on every aspect of trying to grow an organic garden.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's good information, and send those links to me, and I will put them up. We got to let you go here. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more phone call before the commercial break. Nader from Planet Earth. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just want to say I'm a big fan of your show.
Thank you.
And I came across a video recently, actually. It's in Arabic, so I have to translate it and send it to you by email. It was about an Egyptian hacker who logged on to the ISIS servers. Mm-hmm. He saw some of the unedited footage of some of the beheading videos, and he claimed that that pretty much it's in front of a green screen, and they have 5 cameras, high-quality cameras. Mm-hmm. And he said those shooting the footage were not speaking in Arabic, but rather English, and they sounded Western. And he said that he did get a good look at these two film shooters, and they were on a platform, and this was in regards to the 21 Coptic Christian video.
Okay.
That one. And he said that he saw a man and a woman, and the woman was clearly not part of ISIS. She wasn't wearing hijab or any of that sort of thing, and she was speaking in English. And so I'm going to send that over to you, and hopefully I could edit that footage because it's in Arabic, so I'm going to have to retranslate it from Arabic to English for you. And
well, could you send me the link to the videos themselves, because we don't need to translate it from Arabic in order to look at the video and see that there's a camera crew there, which we already knew. These were high-quality videos. They weren't shot with somebody's cell phone. And there are other reasons to have suspected that these were a hoax all along, to try and get us all to hate ISIS so much we'll fling our babies onto their bayonets without question. So if you could send me that information, and I'll dig into it and follow it up. And I got to tell you, it sometimes saddens me that some of my fellows in the film and entertainment industry will whore themselves and their skills and talents to sell this nation into wars of conquest. And I know it's a reality of Hollywood history, going all the way back to World War II and even the Cold War, but it is rather sad to see. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Nader, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you're probably aware, Israel's desire for American children to make war on Iran has opened up a major schism between the Congress of the United States of America, the finest Congress money can buy, and the White House. And we are hearing all this tough talk coming out of Congress that, by golly, the president better do what the Congress tells him to do, or there'll be no end of whatever. And we're in this last week before the deadline for the P5+1 deal. And Israel is trying to derail it. Francois Hollande is throwing all kinds of new requirements into this thing. Israel just sent a delegation to France to coach them on how to derail this deal so that it opens up the door to war with Iran, and which Israel wants as long as American kids are doing the fighting for them. So we have this group of 360 odd, and they are very odd, U.S. lawmakers who signed this letter demanding President Barack Obama add another requirement to the P5+1 deal, in that there has to be guarantees of Iran's curtailment of nuclear activity for decades. And this is a tactic that Israel has used to derail peace agreements in the past. Get sort of 99% of the way there, and then they say, oh, just one more thing. And they'll add one more thing in there. And the other side says, all right, we'll go along with it. We really want this thing to be closed. And then it's just, oh, and by the way, one more thing. And by the way, one more thing. And one more little thing, I'm sure you will agree to this. Until finally the other side realizes that Israel is not bargaining in good faith and walks away. At which point Israel says, see, we tried to come to an agreement, but they walked away. And the U.S. is using the same tactics. But as I mentioned to that earlier caller, if the P5+1 deal goes through and Congress votes through continuance of the sanctions and has enough votes to override Obama's veto, it's not going to harm Iran. It's going to harm the United States, because all those other nations will just leap into Iran and scoop up all those Iranian contracts to do business. And the U.S. businesses will not be allowed to do that, because, after all, we're sanctioning Iran, and even though it's helping to crush the American economy, we're going to prove we're manly enough to take it. It's a brain-dead policy, but Congress is not listening to the will of the American people regarding war with Iran. They're not listening to the White House. They're not listening to common sense. They're listening to Tel Aviv. And Netanyahu wants a war with Iran as long as American kids are going to pay for it and bleed for it, and you will have to pay for it. Now, recently, NBC videotaped an interview between Ann Curry and Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif. And Zarif made some very good points in the interview, because little fact of history you need to remember. Those who want peace seldom have a need to lie. It is the promoters of war for whom truth is a rarity. And so Zarif was out there making a point that I have made on this show many, many times. If Iran hated the Jewish people, they have a large indigenous Jewish population they would be abusing, but they're not. Israel tried to lure Iran's Jews to Israel, and the Iranian Jews said, no, we're happy here. We've got businesses. We're part of the community. They have representation in Iran's parliament. In fact, just like the United States of America, they're overrepresented relative to their percentage population. And apparently, Zarif came off looking so good that NBC only aired a 90-second clip from this interview, then immediately turned around and gave the Israeli ambassador an open microphone on, I think it was Morning with Joe, to let him bash Iran and scream about how we can't trust Iran, and Iran's this, and Iran's that, and Iran tears tags off of couch cushions. Iran sucks the white stuff out of their Oreo cookies and throws away the rest, and whatever else they're going to say. Now, John McCain is out there saying that the U.S. Senate will block any nuclear agreement with Iran. And McCain is, I think, woefully unaware of how foreign policy gets run, because the Senate has to ratify a treaty, but agreements are one step down, and heads of state make agreements all the time that do not require ratification by the legislature. The P5+1 has never been a treaty, but McCain is out there screaming, we will find some way to block it. And so what we have here is Senator John McCain is willing to defy the White House, defy the American people, neither of whom want any more wars, to please his masters in Israel, who do want war with Iran as long as American sons and daughters have to actually fight it. And this service to Israel is a family tradition with the McCains, because if you'll remember, it was his father, Admiral John McCain, who ran the cover-up of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty, which was an attempt by Israel to sink an American ship, frame Egypt for it, to trick America into war on Egypt. Sort of a retry of the Lavon affair. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. is increasing their military presence in the Gulf in case the P5+1 deal does not go through, or as they put it in this article, should an incident occur in the region. And under the category of incident, we might put Israel bombing Iran's power station, the way they did Iraq's. Because remember, Israel has done this before. They flew up to Osirak, Iraq, and bombed Iraq's nuclear power station under the claim that Iraq was building nuclear bombs in the basement, the way Israel is known to be doing at Dimona. Following the 2003 invasion, international inspectors examined the ruins of the power station at Osirak, and all they found was a power station. And we've been hearing from Israel all along, well, if America won't take care of the Iranian nuclear threat, we will have to. And obviously, if Israel does go ahead and bomb Iran's power station, there will be reprisals from Iran, and that's what the U.S. forces are there to protect our dear friends in Israel. Because the U.S. is already committed to supporting Israel in any war in the Middle East, even if Israel starts it. Now, there's a new piece of propaganda going around, was all over the place, about how a top Iranian official promises to raise the flag of Islam over the White House. And this is a story, it's all over the corporate media, and it's being provided by the Middle East Media Research Institute, or MEMRI. And at that point, we can stop reading about this, because MEMRI, which provides free translations of Arabic media to the Western press, is a known Israel propaganda organization, and their translations are bogus, slanted, and biased to always make the Arabs look bad, mean, and dangerous, and Israel look good. One of their most famous falsehoods was claiming Ahmadinejad said, we will wipe Israel off of the map, and those who actually speak Ahmadinejad's language said, no, what he said was the Zionists must fade from the pages of history, which is not the same thing. And MEMRI is once again playing their games. It's nonsense to say that Iran is going to raise the flag of Islam over the White House. I mean, first of all, they'd have to cut down the flag of Israel. And that's going to be a real headache for all of them here. All righty. There's been yet another incident of planes dropping ammunition to reinforce ISIS The boxes are observed to be stenciled with English language markings. ISIS is a manufactured enemy created by the United States to drop into any country as an excuse to invade. And we're already hearing, oh, ISIS is in Yemen. We've got to go into Yemen and save them from ISIS. ISIS is in Libya. We've got to save the Libyans from evil ISIS. That's what they're doing. Meanwhile, down in Ecuador, President Rafael Correa is accusing the CIA of involvement in opposition protests and destabilization activities in his country. Because that's what the U.S. does. Okay. Another story coming out of 12160. Jeremy Morlock tells the U.S. military court he was part of a kill team that faked combat situations in order to murder Afghan civilians. Truth is the first casualty of war, Senator Hiram Johnson, and it certainly is true in the current one as well. All right. Over in Okinawa, the governor of their prefecture has ordered a halt on construction of a U.S. military base there. Apparently, they've been violating their building permits. The Okinawans don't want them there. And because of that, the governor of Okinawa has said, no, this is calling it off, pulling the plug on the whole deal. We're going to take a break for our top-of-the-hour news, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Let's talk about the economy right now. Over at the China-led Development Bank, people are signing on all across Europe, and now the IMF and the ADB are aligning with that. And here's a very interesting story out of Zero Hedge. Washington Blinks will seek partnership with China-led Development Bank. So what we have just seen is the end of this either-or regarding the United States dollar. You will use the dollar or you'll use those other things, because obviously the powers that be have come to recognize that a unipolar dollar-dominated world is over and done with. And there's going to be multiple currencies, and they're going to have to deal with that. And it's going to be a problem, because since the end of World War II and the signing of Bretton Woods, the U.S. financial system became very dependent on the profit they made from the dollar being the global trade and banking currency. And they got lazy, and they allowed our manufacturing to decline, to be offshored, and coupled with the absolute disaster of GMO products, which nobody else in the world wants, they're in serious, serious trouble. And at this point, if we had wise and prudent leadership in Washington, D.C., we would stop all this game playing around the world, bring what remains of our investment capital back home, and start developing new technologies on which new industries and new products can be based to regain our technological leadership that we had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s because of the Apollo Moon program. That's what fueled all that tech boom. Unfortunately, for politicians who don't really know how to do anything except take money from you and spend it, they don't know how to do that. Very few people in Congress actually know manufacturing. Very few people in Congress actually know agriculture. Congress is made up primarily of inherited wealth and lawyers, and they don't know how to run businesses. If you look at, George W. Bush, before he became president, he started a lot of businesses. They all went belly up. Same thing with Mitt Romney. They have enough inherited wealth to survive their failures and try again, but it doesn't mean they're good businessmen. 3 banks in Ukraine failed, all in the same day. They're starting to fall apart over there as well. Now, over at Investment Watch blog, they have a story, Greece faces decisive week as Euro outlaw Tsipras is set to meet Euro Sheriff Merkel. And Tsipras is saying the requirement that Greece go back to the previous agreement is impossible because the debt payments cannot be made. And they're already dipping into savings accounts, retirement funds, and cash surpluses in the utilities trying to make that. Now, Tsipras campaigned on a promise to the Greek people of an end to austerity and simply writing off the Greek debt, he can't go back on that without having riots in the streets. And the European media is starting to turn against Germany. There was this editorial cartoon came out showing when the Nazis were visiting the Parthenon, and they put Merkel in there with them, going on back to that issue that Germany does owe Greece reparations for World War II that they won't pay. Merkel's attitude is, we're not going to pay you that, but you've got to pay us. And that, of course, does not make her look like she's morally in the right to the rest of Europe. Germany's 10-year yield continues to drop. It's now at 0.17%. And the German people are very unhappy over this whole European Union deal because their strong economy has been strip mined to prop up the weaker nations, to spread the debt around, to try and prevent any one nation from defaulting and triggering a derivatives firestorm. But at some point, all the European Union nations are going to be hovering at the edge of default. And when one goes, they'll all go. Now, as that caller, John from Barbados, mentioned earlier, Bloomberg News is reporting that Russia's economy is reviving despite the sanctions. And it's another reminder of these boneheaded, poorly thought out policies coming out of Washington, D.C. that sound really good in the news bite. We're going to sanction Russia for stealing Crimea. And it's bogus because Russia didn't steal Crimea. Crimea left Kiev of their own free will and merged with Russia, again of their own free will. And the sanctions have caused far more harm to Europe, the United States, Canada, Alaska, South America, than they're causing Russia. But because our government is institutionally incapable of admitting error, they're going to keep on screaming the sanctions have to be there. And the same thing's going to happen with Russia that's happening with Iran. Other countries are going to step right on into Russia and grab up those contracts that would have gone to American businesses. Now, over in Great Britain, George Osborne's new budget has a little sting to it, in that retirement funds above a certain threshold are going to be hit with a 55% stealth tax. And Osborne sold this saying this was only going to affect the retirement of the ultra rich who can afford it. Unfortunately, the threshold point turns out to be so low that middle-class British subjects, over a lifetime of working and paying into their retirement funds, are going to cross the threshold and lose more than half that money to the government. We are seeing a world in which all of these governments are literally looting the retirement funds of their own people to try and stay solvent underneath these private central banks that by design create more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And it's not just Great Britain. Washington is now starting to dip into the retirement savings of their own federal workers to try and stay solvent, try and stay underneath the debt ceiling. Now, back in the 1990s, when I called attention to the fact that the Clinton administration was looting the Social Security Trust Fund for the cash buildup for the baby boomers and spending it as general revenues, I got attacked, solidly, stalked, literally, by this one poster who was posting from a .gov domain, who kept attacking me and saying I was being silly and insisting that the government has the right to spend Social Security funds as general revenues whenever they want because it's the government's money, which it is not. It is your money, entrusted to the government, and that's not the same thing. So now that it's federal employees' retirement money being embezzled, I'm wondering if this poster still feels the same way. All righty. U.S. Treasury has come out basically admitting that the indicators are we're looking at a major stock market crash somewhere in the not-too-distant future. And they're talking about a phrase, a 2 sigma threshold in market valuation metrics. It's a technical analysis, and the technical analysis is sending signals that the market is overvalued, which Yellen's already admitted. There's too much volatility, and they're keeping the market up primarily by rigging and moving the available capital back and forth. They're not luring new investors in. And behind it all, of course, the productivity of those underlying companies is not increasing. In fact, the earnings reports continue to be turning downward. And I think more and more people are beginning to realize that all the financial reporting coming out of the U.S. government and the corporate media is about as real as Saddam's nuclear weapons. We already know the claimed 5.6% unemployment is a complete joke. We've got 94 million Americans in this country willing and able to work who have not been able to find a job. That's certainly far more than 5.6% unemployment. They're lying to you to keep their jobs, to keep you docile, to keep you from getting angry. And the more they lie, the angrier we're ultimately going to be. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the economy here. Now, up in Chicago, as you know, Mayor Emanuel is in a runoff election. And, of course, all the big corporate interests are in his favor. The Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times have endorsed him. They're claiming he's got a 16-point lead going into the runoff, which if he'd had that much of a lead, there wouldn't be a runoff to begin with. But now apparently Chicago's banks have come out saying that unless Rahm Emanuel is reelected as mayor of Chicago, that it will destroy the value of Chicago's debt market and there will be a Detroit-like financial collapse. So the banks are basically out there saying, vote for our guy or bad things will happen to you because we are in charge. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Thomas in Indiana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing today?
Doing good.
Oh, yeah? Good deal. I was calling about your article that you have in there about the Russian economy and how it's reviving and not going down. I didn't really get a chance to read all the way into it, but I know that oil is down quite a bit. They're like $50 to $60 a barrel from what it was before. So, how is that affected with the ruble or anything? Because I know that isn't the ruble kind of tied to the set of oil prices also?
No, that's the ruble floats free. That's why there's this ongoing contest between value of the ruble, value of the dollar. Right now, only China is pegging their yuan to the dollar, and there's talk about delinking that as well. Now, Russia's economy is very heavily into oil and gas, and it has been a problem for them with this crushing down of oil prices, especially with Ukraine gobbling up natural gas and refusing to pay for it. But Russia's economy is not solely dependent on oil and gas. They're not a one-crop farm, so to speak, and they're basically putting their emphasis onto other areas of their economy, and they're doing business around the world. And so Russia has suffered some harm from the artificial suppression of the oil prices, but again, according to Bloomberg, they're coming back because their economic activity is shifting away from oil and gas and into other areas.
Yes, diversify it in other areas instead of keeping it on, on just a couple things, which is pretty smart,
Yes.
Especially, I think that also would be with also arms deals that are possibly going around.
That's part of it. Also, they're selling power stations to other countries, and those are big-ticket items out there.
What do you think is going on with the dollar now, since everybody seems to be wanting to sign on to that China Asian bank? Isn't it like the South Pacific Asian Alliance or something?
The China, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. There's a bunch of these parallel systems now. BRICS, the Asian Bank, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. And what has happened is the dollar is no longer the single globe and trade banking currency. It is still the biggest one, but it is rapidly shrinking. And I think finally somebody has realized that they're not going to be able to get the world to go back to total dependence on the dollar, especially because other nations have seen how the U.S. government weaponized that dollar as a tool of foreign policy. So,
Exactly. But doesn't it also, Mark, doesn't that kind of fall back to the Rothschilds, though? Because the UK, if the UK signing on with it, then does that just mean that the British pound is being signed on to it? Because it's obviously going to be incorporating Rothschild. Somehow they're going to put their little tentacles inside of it,
Well, they're certainly going to try, but...
Same as they've done with Ukraine, same as the cases I've read, some old Ukraine things, and Poroshenko has made a deal with the Rothschilds also, so these guys are, anyway, they're gonna get inside of it no matter what, so they win no matter what, You have both sides of the aisle.
I disagree. I mean, one of the reasons that Russia went from good buddy to the special high interest targets list was when Russia took more direct control of their central bank in order to manage the economy for the benefit of Russia and the Russian people. And that's when all of this war talk against Russia began. Now we are getting rumors from inside Russia that Russia may nationalize that central bank, which is really going to tick off the Rothschilds. At the moment, we're seeing the power and influence of the Rothschilds on the wane because the world has woken up to this 300-year-plus long scam of private central banking as being the author of all these wars and all this misery. And people around the world are saying, we don't want to have that system in our country any longer. We're getting protests all against Europe, protests against austerity. And people are really looking at the true nature of private central banks and realizing they do not want to be the victims of this scam any longer.
Yes, I agree with that. Can I throw in this one more thing with you?
Sure.
What we see that Russia's doing with their monetary, it's the same thing that we used to do before 1913, Mike.
Yes.
Before 1913 came, they used to have a 4-year charter. They used to vote on it. Now, I've never heard about that anywhere in my history books. I'm 40 years old, Never have I was ever taught that in American history class until, you start looking into things. You go like, what's a 4-year charter with the Fed? What?
Well, there was never a 4-year charter with the Fed. The first and second banks of the United States had 20-year charters because back then banks were only chartered for 20 years so that there was an automatic escape hatch if the bank was not beneficial to the country. Basically, the refusal of Congress to renew the charter for the first Bank of the United States was the cause of the War of 1812. The ending of the charter of the second Bank of the United States triggered the assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson. That's why when they created the Federal Reserve, a.k.a. the third Bank of the United States, it was originally created with a 100-year charter, which in the 1930s was amended by Congress to make it open-ended. So there is no expiration date on the Federal Reserve. Now, that being said, Congress at any time can vote to repeal that charter, but they won't because that Federal Reserve is a very, very generous campaign contributor.
Yes, it is, yeah. I thought like back after Andrew Jackson was president, that they did used to go from, they used to vote, that Congress has repealed it a couple times, and they have flipped it over where it wasn't so much a private centralized bank.
Those were the 3 times. The first and second banks of the United States, and then the third Bank of the United States was named the Federal Reserve so that historians didn't realize it was the same scam all over again. They put the name Federal on it to make it sound like it's part of the government, but it isn't. It's no more federal than Federal Express. It's just a name to swindle ordinary Americans into thinking that this is somehow official government policy when it is, in fact, money junkie predation wrapped in the aura of government policy. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Thomas. We'll be right back with another phone call after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, talking about the economy. And there's an article over at Zero Hedge that basically states what we all know to be true. The Federal Reserve Bank must be destroyed. And they start with an interesting little historical reference. During the Roman Republic, Cato the Elder ended every single speech he made in the Roman Senate by saying Carthage must be destroyed. Even if the speech had nothing to do with war in Carthage, dealing with the sewage problems. We've got to get the city cleaned up that's disease here, and Carthage must be destroyed. And it's saying basically we all need to start ending all of our discussions, or even starting our discussions with the Federal Reserve must be destroyed. It is inherently unstable. The private central banks are the authors of all the suffering and hardship and poverty in the world and the wars and assassinations. Apparently all wars are bankers' wars got mentioned over on Coast to Coast Radio the other day. Story out of 12160. Mainstream media now admitting the obvious financial crisis set to cause civil unrest, because we're seeing it all over the world in every nation that is enslaved to a private central bank. There are protests and riots in the streets by people who are tired of working themselves to death and see the product of that work go into the pockets of these private central bankers who get that wealth for nothing more than ink and paper and numbers in a computer without returning anything of any value to the people they take that wealth from. And so they're expecting it here, which gets us to this Operation Jade Helm, which we've all been hearing about. These are exercises to take place inside the United States of America in several states, and apparently they've added Florida and one other state, which Florida and Mississippi have been added to the list. Texas and Utah were on there, and they're openly saying over at Stars and Stripes that this is all about the U.S. Army invading and conquering a state, one of the United States, for daring to refuse to accept the dictates of Washington, D.C., which is becoming a reality. And they're talking about being able to capture the state capitals. That's what they're training you to do. Surgical strikes against dissenters. Extractions, meaning kidnappings for torture. Basically, Jade Helm is about training the U.S. military to reconquer the separate states. They're getting ready for a new civil war in this country, because killing millions and millions of Americans is preferable to loosening the grasp of the private central bankers on all of our wallets. Give up profits to the bankers? That can't be done. We'll kill 20% of the American people, and that'll teach the remaining 80% to be loyal slaves to the bankers without argument. And that'll be the end of that whole situation, they think. Meanwhile, story out of Investment Watch blog, the Justice Department has now issued orders to bank tellers all across America to contact law enforcement if they suspect your cash withdrawal may have something to do with illicit activity. There doesn't need to be any proof, no red flag indicator. Merely if the bank teller gets suspicious, processing your transaction is now enough to put you on a list to be investigated by authorities and to have your funds seized under the civil forfeiture laws. Law enforcement in this country is no longer about law enforcement. Basically, they're down to the moral level of Sir Guy of Gisborne's henchmen, riding across the British countryside, stealing pigs and chickens whenever they feel like it. For Prince John. That's where we are. We live in a government that is openly pillaging the people to keep itself funded, to keep itself in power. All right, we're going to grab another phone call here. Joe in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I wanted to talk about the thing you posted a couple of days ago regarding the pension, and I wanted to know if, how a scam occurs nationwide like the Federal Reserve. There's also other scams that take place that are not quite as known, but still cost the taxpayers a lot of money, and one of those is a software program that's called Telestaff. And Telestaff is short for telephone staffing. It's a software program used all across the United States by unions, and the unions use it to increase the pay of an employee by as much as 5 to 10 times what the employee should be receiving from the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And when you take that kind of money, a employee's pension is also based on that accelerated or increased rate. And all across the United States where the software is being used, you find the taxpayers don't have enough money to run their own communities because they're stuck funding pensions. And
now, hold it. First of all, this sounds to me like somebody who says it's okay to defund the pensions, and it isn't. Now, I don't know about this Telestaff. This is the first I've heard of it. But here is the situation. When you go to work for a business or the government, they make a contract with you that there is a pension plan that you will partly pay into, they will partly pay into. And when you reach retirement age, the pension fund money will be there, supposedly wisely invested with interest to pay for your retirement. Now, it is a contract, and up until recently, pension funds were obligated to meet the terms of that contract. Congress recently passed a law saying that if the pension funds are in financial difficulty, they can retroactively change the terms of the contract and give you less money than was promised. And the real reason the pensions are in trouble, besides the fact that they're now being looted by the government itself, is because back in 2008, when the mortgage-backed security fraud was underway, Wall Street's pet rating agencies rated these mortgage bundles AAA. And under the law, pension funds, retirement funds can only invest in AAA-rated securities. So the pension funds were buying up these mortgage bundles, the fraud imploded, and all these pensions were defunded. And nobody wants to stand up and point the finger of blame where it richly deserves to go, Wall Street, both because the Wall Street bankers are too big to jail and because government would be, in the crosshairs saying, why didn't you stop this? And so that's the real reason these pensions are in trouble. And now the Congress, rather than point the finger of blame where it deserves to be, Wall Street fraud, is simply telling the pension funds, you can now renege on your promises and just pay whatever you feel like paying them instead of what you promised. And we've got the state of California is now dipping into their state employee pension funds. We've got the U.S. government now dipping into some of their pension funds, trying to keep the payments going, trying to keep this Ponzi scheme economy going. And, it sounds to me, to be very honest, you're playing this blame the victim game, which we were hearing with Scott Walker during that whole situation where they were cutting the pensions up there, saying, oh, they make too much money anyway, they're too rich, they're living off the hog. Okay?
No, that's not what I mean. I'll just say a couple of things. One, remember when Bell, California and the employees were taking home $1.5 million annual pensions? And then CalPERS had to come back in and say, look, we know that you don't deserve this. And they still tried to tell the public that they were entitled to $800,000 a year jobs when the job paid $50,000. But it took a while for it to come out. And then when Bernie Madoff finally got caught, it took the whistleblower, 10 years to get the public and law enforcement to listen to him.
12.
He tried to come forward, and no one wanted to hear him for 10 years.
Yeah, big financial fraud is a protected activity under the U.S. government. Players
involved.
And when you live in a fascist economic dictatorship, those who make money get to keep it, and nobody asks how they make it. And when they have a big kaboinga and lose a bunch of money, the losses get transferred onto the people, which is what TARP and quantitative easing and bailouts and bail-ins are really all about, making ordinary people who were not a part of the financial system pay the cost for financial fraud. We are now literally having laws passed that make us victims to the fraudsters. And if we stand up and say that's wrong, we're in violation of the law.
What I wanted to say was if people would Google telestaff racketeering, they would learn that the thing may be taking place even in their own communities, at telestaff racketeering.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
What else? I've kind of got like a brain.
Well, that's okay. We're coming up on a commercial break anyway, so we're going to let you go. Thank you very much.
Go ahead. What I want to say. The taxes have to be raised in order to fund it. That's what I wanted to say. As things get bad, the first thing they do is they turn to the taxpayers and say, we need more. Your property taxes, business fees, everything. And that's what they use to keep propping it up.
And the problem with that is we, the people, don't have any more money to be taxed. This idea by government that there's still plenty of wealth out here for them to grab onto to keep the Ponzi system going, that's no longer true. We don't have it anymore. The money junkies got all the money, which was the whole intent of the private central banking scam, and nobody planned what to do when they finally succeeded and the system imploded. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Joe. We'll be right back with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I was doing a web search, and I'm seeing oblique references to telestaff racketeering, but I can't actually find a source article as to what that is supposed to be. So it kind of looks like something that's sort of floating around out there, but there may not be a there. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dave the Thumb. Hello, Thumb. How are you?
Hey, Mike, thanks. Great show. It's Dave in the Thumb.
In the Thumb. Okay.
Yeah. I'm in the Thumb of Michigan. So.
Oh, now it makes sense. Okay. I had no idea.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I had no idea that's what the reference was to, and okay, yeah, I just got a correction there on the little text screen. So what's on your mind?
Okay, a couple things. I don't have TV in my home anymore, but I was at my mother-in-law's the other day flipping through the channels, and it was Saturday night around 10 o'clock. There was I landed on the Cartoon Network. There's a TV show called Boondocks, and it's a black cartoon, and there was a guy kind of sounded like Arnold Schwarzenegger interviewing black folks and about Obama running for president, and you got to pull that up if you can. I talked to my buddy. He said they usually post those on YouTube. So it was Saturday's program, and they were using the N word, the F word. You know, they kind of bleeped out part of the F word, but not the N word, and all of them were using that word, calling Obama.
This is on the Cartoon Channel, huh?
Cartoon Network.
Cartoon Network.
It blew me away, and they were saying stuff like, well, I'm going to vote for that N-word because he's an N-word, and he's going to lower my taxes. And then the white guy who kind of sounded like Arnold, he says, well, actually, no, his platform is to raise your taxes. And they said, oh, really? Well, I'm going to vote for that N-word anyway. And then they said, well, I'm going to vote for Obama because he doesn't stand for the banker bailouts. And he says, well, actually, he does, he helped, structure them. And they're like, oh, really? Oh, well, we're going to vote for him anyway. I mean, it was incredible. And so then on the next day on the way home yesterday, my wife pointed out a really cool front bumper sticker. It said, run, Hillary, run!
Well, you know, it sounds to me like it actually makes a valid point about how these things happen, where most voters don't really think about the issues. They vote their racial, gender allegiance. I mean, Hillary is counting on the women's vote for 2016, which is why a lot of people were very critical of Obama's suggestion of making voting mandatory, because it's going to bring a lot more uneducated morons who don't care to learn the issues into those voting booths. And just makes
I didn't hear that, making voting mandatory.
Yeah,
huh?
He was doing that last week. He's already backed off on it. But I mean, that would just, you'd have people who were coming in and just voting for all kinds of bizarre stuff just because they resented having to be made to vote.
Right. Wow.
Heck, I could even win with that.
Yeah, right. Well, I vote for you.
Thank you.
Anyway, think about that front bumper sticker. Run, Hillary, run.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I thought that was great.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. I'm going to let you go here. Now I know what it means by the thumb. Somebody just sent me the link to that video. I'll be taking a look at that and see if we are going to post that one in the next hour. Now, interesting story out of The Guardian. And the corporate media is finally waking up to the fact that they're losing audience and business to the online community. And this whole article is basically, oh, pity us, feel bad for us, the slow death of the great American newsroom. And they're going on and on about how the traditional media is just suffering at the hands of us online upstarts. And they're losing advertising revenues because everyone's going to the online community, and something has to be done to protect the cherished institutions of the corporate media. And I posted a comment which probably is not going to be approved because now The Guardian is pre-moderating all my comments. They don't like the things I have to say. And the comment I posted was, there's a reason for the public shift away from the traditional corporate media to the online independent media. And it's very simple. The public is aware that this large corporate media is controlled by financial and corporate interests, whereas us online independents are not. We're running on spare change and donations and not much else. Now, while the corporate media stood shoulder to shoulder in proclaiming that Iraq had nuclear weapons, The independent media out here is saying, we're not sure. We haven't seen any proof. This might be a lie to trick us into war. And while the corporate media continued to push the idea that the Earth is getting dangerously warm and laid the blame solely on human activity, we here in the independent media said there are flaws in their theory. They're making scientific mistakes. There is reason to doubt. And the eventual recognition that there were no nuclear weapons in Iraq and several record-setting winters have since taught the public where they must go to find the truth. And when the corporate media remembers that truth rather than propaganda is supposed to be what they provide the public, those newsrooms and TV studios will start to grow again. And we here in the independent media will find something else to do with our time. But until the corporate media goes back to telling the truth and serving as a watchdog on government abuse, which is the reason they were given that First Amendment, the independent media is here to stay, and we're growing. We've got the lion's share of the audience out there. I've got more people reading my website than MSNBC has viewers right now. That hasn't stopped CNN from coming out with a bunch of reports about digital terrorists and cyber bullies. There's a campaign in the corporate media to demonize all free speech on the web. Oh, they're out there. They're not properly vetted. The government doesn't agree with them, and they're basically trying to find some way they can demonize us. And over the years, they've tried all kinds of stuff. Oh, the Internet's a haven for child porn. There are predators coming after your children. Keep them away from the Internet and only let them watch the network news. Meanwhile, over in France, there's a big stink cranking up there because there's this French cartoon artist who calls himself Zéon. He's 31. He's originally from Paris, and basically says that for all the talk about freedom of speech following the Charlie Hebdo attack, freedom of speech in France means you can attack Muslims and even Christians, but if you say anything harsh about Israel and the Jews, you will go to jail, and basically relates the story about how his door got kicked in and he was put under arrest, all on the orders of an organization called the National Bureau of Monitoring of Anti-Semitism. It's out there saying, arrest that person, arrest that person, arrest that person. So instead of je suis Charlie, it's je suis hypocrite over there in France. So now, let's talk a little bit about Ted Cruz. He's announced his candidacy today. There's already a wrinkle. Ted Cruz is not a natural-born citizen. He was born in Canada of an American mother and a Cuban father. And then the Cruz family came to the United States. The father became a naturalized citizen. But that's not what natural-born really means. Now, there's already out there everyone saying, oh, those darn birthers, they're at it again, and they're trying to basically say that any child born of an American mother in a foreign country is a natural-born citizen. No, you can say it's a citizen. It's not natural-born. Natural-born is in this country, and you need to go back to the Constitution and understand the context for that requirement. The founding fathers of this nation were very aware of Europe's history, of all these nations who had foreign-born rulers who couldn't even speak the language of the nation that they were ruling and just played the nations off of each other in constant wars and invasion, and they did not want that for the United States. They wanted the United States to always be under the control of people who had lived their entire lives in this country, born into this country. And that's what natural-born means. They can say that Ted Cruz is a citizen because of his mother's American citizenship, but they can't say he's natural-born if he was born in Canada. And so already we're seeing this idea about we think he can win, therefore we're going to stretch the rules and twist the rules and come up with legal rigmarole. I mean, they're already admitting he was born in a foreign country. And only one of his parents is an American citizen. That does not meet the definition of a natural-born citizen, which is a requirement to be the President of the United States of America. We've got to take a break for our newscast. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And I want to talk a little bit more about this Ted Cruz situation here. because they're already out there trying to redefine what it means to be a natural-born citizen so that Ted Cruz, who was born in Canada of an American mother and a Cuban father, can qualify. And they're going to change the meaning of the Constitution by changing the definition of the words itself. But it doesn't work because, as I was saying before, the intention of the Founding Fathers was to have the United States only ruled by people who were born here and lived here their entire lives. After seeing centuries of what Europe's swapping of children among the various ruling families did there. So, a guy by the name of Jack Maskell wrote this article, and he's out there trying to create this legal Mobius strip to get around the constitutional requirements for the office of president. But by his logic, we can destroy it with reducto ad absurdum. By Maskell's logic, a child could be born of an American mother and a Russian father, spend all of his life in Russia, developing an affinity for the Russian view of the world, then migrate to the United States of America, daddy becomes a naturalized citizen, meet the residency requirement, and then be eligible for President of the United States of America, and that is not what the Founding Fathers intended. But they're pushing really, really hard, and one of the reasons they are, according to an article in the Jerusalem Post, Ted Cruz is an unabashed supporter of Israel, and whatever Israel wants, Ted Cruz will give them, and have we not had enough of those kind of people in Washington, D.C.? So Mr. Cruz will not be receiving any support from me, probably a great deal of criticism in the coming months. There's a lot of people supporting him, whether they just want him because he'll do what Israel says, or they're still out to prove that they're in control of the American political system. That's what Netanyahu's speech to Congress was. We're still in charge here. We're still in control. We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it. Maybe not so much anymore. I would love to see 2016 be the election year where all the friends of Israel are pink-slipped, kicked out of our public buildings, hard enough to bounce 3 times on the concrete and run out of town on a rail. Meanwhile, there's been an interesting spin on the protests regarding the illegal amnesty. There was a protest going on out in California, and the protesters, while demonstrating against the amnesty for the illegal aliens, turned and went into the Mexican consulate to demand the Mexican government give the American people the same goodies and benefits that the U.S. government is giving to the illegal immigrants from Mexico. And it's a very tongue-in-cheek protest, but it does make the point here. America's current immigration policy is a joke. If we want to have a fair immigration policy in the United States of America, we should have the same requirements Mexico has. You can't just walk into Mexico and get a job and be a citizen. You walk into Mexico without their official permission, you are going to jail. And if you sneak into Mexico and you are not detected, you are not getting free driver's licenses, free entertainment, free horse rides, free whatever. It is a complete joke out there, and they're making a valid point. Now, a while back, we were reporting on this story of a gentleman who lives in Great Britain, Tony Rook, who, in an act of civil disobedience, refused to pay the mandatory TV license fee to BBC, under the grounds it violates Section 15 of the Terrorism Act. And Rook's whole point was that because BBC reported the collapse of World Trade Center Building Number 7 20 minutes before it actually happened, they had to be part of the terror plot. And the judge agreed. This went to court, and you're not going to see this reported in the American media. Barely got a mention over at the British press. But the court agreed. The evidence is overwhelming that the BBC had advance knowledge of Building 7 coming down, which puts them in violation of Section 15 of the British Terrorism Act. And Rook said, I will not support a terrorist organization, and the judge agreed. Now, I still get emails from people saying, oh, our government doesn't do this kind of thing. Grumble. Well, on the 60th anniversary of the overthrow of the elected Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, the National Security Archive is posting recently declassified CIA documents of the U.S. role in the overthrow of the democratically elected government of Iran in 1953 and the imposition of the Shah. Now, we've known all along they did this. But the declassified documents are the first official confirmation that, yes, the U.S. government did this. They went into Iran, they overthrew the democratically elected government, they installed a dictatorship in order that Iran's oil be sold at below market prices to American and British oil companies. Yes, they did it. They admit they did it. It took them 60 years to admit it. Will they admit in 50-some-odd years that they were behind 9/11? We already know what this government is doing. And the fact that they will classify it until after the guilty parties are dead and gone and beyond retribution doesn't change the fact that these things do get done. Now then, one of the listeners of our show sent me in an essay that his 14-year-old daughter wrote for her 8th grade English class on the right to keep and bear arms. And we have it linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And the summary that she wrote was, it is clear then that all Americans have the right to defend themselves. Guns are the most reliable means of defense and give citizens the ability to protect themselves from violent attackers and fight back without a chance of getting hurt. All anti-gun laws do is take away the protection of citizens by disarming them, putting them in danger. And it's well worth reading in its entirety. But the good news here is that very clearly the Common Core demonization of the Second Amendment is failing in our public schools. These children are smart enough to figure out what's going on, and that's a good thing. We've been seeing all of this propaganda, this brainwashing of our children, trying to tell them that the Second Amendment only gives guns to the National Guard and the police forces. They're trying to tell our children now that Congress can change the Constitution at will. And all the kids have to do is go back and actually read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights for themselves, and they'll know Common Core is lying to them. The public schools are the instruments of propaganda directed against our children by the federal government. Another story here out of Government Slaves. Government watching the rise of well-armed American militias. Ooh, the American people, how dare they stand up for their freedoms. Now, word of caution. Some of these militias are government undercover operations to try and create some kind of a controllable uprising to justify a gun grab and military law, martial law. So you have to be careful. The last time they were wagging militias around the country as the latest version of the domestic threat, a lot of them were exposed as FBI undercover operations, trying to lure people in so they could identify the patriots or at least the gun enthusiasts. So you have to be really, really careful about aligning with one of these groups. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you who are visiting my website, whatreallyhappened.com, we're doing some repairs to the server today, trying to fix things that were broken with an upgrade to PHP. And so there may be brief intervals where the site is offline this afternoon. It's not a hacking attack. It's expected. Just everybody relax. Go out for a walk. Talk to your loved ones. Come on back later on here. Now, getting on back to the issue of computers. A story coming out of CBC. The Communication Security Establishment's Cyber Warfare Toolbox is revealed, and they're talking about top-secret documents that got leaked, showing that Canada's Electronic Spy Agency has developed a huge arsenal of cyber warfare tools in partnership with the U.S. and Britain to hack into computers and phones all over the world, including, pointedly, in friendly trade countries like Mexico. Well, why are you hacking into computers and phones in a friendly country? To steal their business secrets. And people are very, very upset about this cyberocracy that's emerging in our midst, where all the world's computers and smart devices and networks are being turned into the tools of our enslavement. Another story coming out of Washington's blog talking about the rise of automated posting on the net, where if you're in a discussion on some news article and you're up against some moron who's out there spewing garbage and won't respond to anything you actually say, you could be arguing with a bot. And they're talking, as an example, about this guy named Lek, who wrote a bot that prowls all over the net looking for discussions on human-caused global warming and attacks anybody who doubts the dogma of human-caused global warming. And that's not the spirit of debate. That's jamming, that's noise, that's propaganda. And that is not covered by the First Amendment. Meanwhile, story out of IntelliHub, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, who's the Associate Dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, was interviewed on CNN saying the time has come for censorship of digital terrorism on the Internet and social networks, meaning censorship of any criticism of Israel. Israel does not appreciate freedom of speech. They don't respect it. They don't value it. Israel hates freedom of speech. Because when there's freedom of speech, Israel cannot get away with what they do with impunity. So, now we were talking about this before where antiwar.com has gone public over the fact that Google's AdSense, who advertises on their website, they refuse to advertise on what really happened, but they do on anti-war. But on certain articles that are not approved of, the ads will not work. They're disconnected. And apparently the articles that aroused the ire of Google were photos of the torture in Abu Ghraib or the people being killed in eastern Ukraine. And Google is attempting to put pressure not just on antiwar.com, but all of their ad clients to only have content that Google approves of, which is in line with the U.S. government. And that is a violation of free speech. One of the reasons we should, in the Blueprint for the New America, not allow any one corporation, one government, one individual to acquire too much wealth is inevitably that wealth gets put to nefarious purposes, to increase their wealth and power. You're dealing with addictive behavior. Alrighty, speaking of stories they don't approve of, amazingly enough, here we are, March 23rd, and we're still dealing with winter weather. Over in Great Britain, they're looking at more snow coming in, temperatures below freezing. Story out of NPR News, snow arrives, heavy totals south of Metro. This is in the Twin Cities area. Spring snow blankets, southern part of Minnesota. Slush Fest 2015, up to 9 inches of snow fell Sunday, far southwest Metro. Spring returns by weekend. Spring snow could dump 5 inches across Chicago area. And we are hearing about all these planned Easter egg hunts for the weekend, because we're on Easter weekend. Good Friday's coming up. They're having to cancel the Easter egg hunts because there's still snow on the ground. I'm dreaming of a white Easter. And we have been hearing in the media for the last week about how this was the warmest winter on record. And they've been out there because they can't tell you that you didn't see all this snow and ice over the last winter. They've got two new propaganda tactics they're using. The first is in all the local papers. They're saying, yes, there was a lot of snow and ice here, but trust us, everywhere else it was warm. Only here, this one little place, was there record cold and ice. So you should just forget all about that. And the other one they're doing is they're basically doing what Ramses the Great did with Kadesh. Told a bold-faced lie about a far-off location knowing that people can't check for themselves. And they've been doing it all week saying, oh, the Arctic ice cap, this is a record low for the Arctic ice cap this year. Well, maps from the Cryosphere Project at the University of Illinois is showing that there's a lot more ice today in the Arctic than there was this date in 2006. So already we caught them in another lie. I should have turned over the egg timer on that one. They are lying to you to get your money, your obedience, because that's all they know how to do. Our government has had so many generations of controlling you with lies, fraud, and deception. They don't know any other way to get what they want. Another story coming out of Investment Watch blog, those climatologists who are not in the pay of the global warming agenda are saying the evidence is piling up that we are, in fact, heading into a new little ice age. This is backed up by ice core data, satellite data, various other indicators, along with our own experience these last few winters. And still the carbon Nazis are going to come on out there and say, oh, it's all the fault of humans. We've got to tax carbon. We will stop climate change if we tax carbon. No, you won't. Climate always changes, always has, always will. And I'm getting all these emails from people saying, well, so there's a snow this late in the spring. It's not all that unusual. And I'm saying you're missing the point. Back in 2000, the global warming people were saying there would be no more snow and ice at all. UK Independent, March 20th, 2000. Snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Remember the last couple of months. Does it look like snowfalls are a thing of the past? They absolutely blew that prediction. And if they can't predict what's happening in just 15 years accurately, then they're not able to predict what's happening in 100 years. Alrighty. I'm going to start with this call on the line. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. Wes in Idaho, aloha. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Are you familiar with the work of John David Oates of Australia and his work with reverse speech?
This isn't to play the album backwards at 78 RPM and the devil talks to you.
There is backward masking, which is intentional, which is what the Beatles did. Everybody smoked pot.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, yes. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about science and health issues. And apparently there was a woman, or is a woman, in Santa Barbara County in California being monitored for Ebola and started showing signs of illness. She's now been transferred to a Los Angeles area hospital as a precautionary measure. And we're seeing these reports coming out of Africa in these areas where they said Ebola has been eradicated, and yet they still have patients popping up here and there. Not a lot, no reason to panic, but there's obviously a vector for infection that they have not accounted for. Now, more alarming over here is a story out of Business Insider, where emails are showing that the World Health Organization intentionally delayed calling Ebola a public health emergency. And apparently, their own staff, 2 months before the official declaration, the staff was saying, this is a problem we should be looking at. And I'm sure from the point of view of the World Health Organization, if American pharmaceutical companies don't have a vaccine or treatment to sell, why make a fuss? You know, we're pushing flu vaccinations and measles vaccinations right now. When they actually have something to sell for Ebola, then it'll be big news. Oh, it's a threat. It's coming. Now then. Story out of Natural News. Oil and gas industry pumping more toxic waste into drinking water aquifers. And basically, they're talking about another source of drinking and irrigation water has become contaminated from this fracking mixture, which now they won't tell you what's in there. There are 200 different chemicals. Some of them are toxic waste. Remember, we had a former employee of the fracking industry call into the show and said that the fracking companies are making deals with other corporations to take their toxic waste that can't be disposed of any other way and just pump it 1,000 feet into the ground on the assumption that it will not percolate back up to the surface. And, of course, that's proving to be a faulty assumption. And according to this latest report, up until now, they've been saying that any leakage from fracking was faulty equipment. It was an accident. We didn't intend to it. But apparently, NBC up in the Bay Area was saying that, yeah, this wasn't an accident. They know what they're doing. And one of the reasons they're having a huge drought problem in California right now is that 2 large aquifers have become contaminated by fracking fluid. The water is not safe to drink or use on irrigation. And when you couple that with the deterioration of the water management system across the western part of the United States, that's why they're running out of water. The western part of the U.S. has always been a desert. What keeps it from being a desert is good water management. And today the aqueducts and the water mains are full of cracks, spilling millions and millions of gallons of useful water into parts of the earth that simply don't need it. But the drought is caused by human-caused global warming. Apparently, some parts of Los Angeles are now starting to put up giant rainwater collection funnels. They're that short of water right now. Now, over the weekend, a couple of different agencies came out and acknowledged that there is a link between glyphosate, the main ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup weed killer, and cancer. This came from the World Health Organization. The International Agency for Research on Cancer said glyphosate is classified as a probable carcinogen to humans. And they said there's limited evidence that glyphosate will cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in humans. Another agency up at the United Nations came out with a similar report. Monsanto's response is, oh, you're just being too dramatic. You're just making a big stink over nothing here, and we've got all of our scientists that we pay very generous salaries to saying that this is all 100% safe. And basically Monsanto is telling the U.S. government, go back and check again. And Monsanto seems to have forgotten what is supposed to be the order of authority here, where if the government says there may be a health hazard here, the company deals with the potential health hazard. The company doesn't turn around and say, you go back and check again. You keep recalculating the data until it comes out the way we want it here. Now, because glyphosate is now linked with cancer, it has reignited a debate regarding the war on drugs in Colombia, where Roundup and glyphosate are the primary weapons being dropped onto the coca fields in Colombia. And now they're beginning to realize this may be causing serious medical harm to the people who live on those lands. And we're not talking about those who are directly involved in the cocaine trade. We're talking about farmers who just happen to be on the neighboring field. They're eradicating the cocoa plants and the people of Colombia all at the same time here. Now, down in El Salvador, there's a little bit of good news, because Monsanto has been down in there trying to basically force everybody into GMO seeds. And the Ministry of Agriculture has basically released a bunch of contracts to provide non-GMO seeds to poor farmers across the country, and basically removing any limits on swapping and trading and giving away seeds. And it doesn't sound like that's a big deal until you realize that in 30% of the states here in the United States of America, sharing seeds is now illegal. The penalty for violating those laws can be fines up to $7,500 a day. So if you've got a little garden and you've got some flowers and your daughter-in-law who lives 3 blocks away says, ooh, I'd like some of those, and you harvest the seeds out of those flowers and give them to her, you are in violation of the seed sharing law. Because if you want flower seeds, you go right on down to the store and you buy them from the GMO companies. They are literally trying to create a legal monopoly for the providers of these commercially produced, often GMO seeds by saying that you cannot harvest the seeds from your own plants and replant them or give them to anybody else or get involved in the seed-sharing library, which a lot of communities that are trying to get back to organic farming are doing. I remember when I was a farm kid growing up in New Hampshire, seed sharing was just part of what you did. If you had more seed than you need, you would give the leftover to somebody who was a little short. And you were always swapping seeds. I got some pumpkin seeds. Oh, good. I got some cucumber seeds. All right, let's swap. It's now been made illegal in 30% of the United States of America to do that in order to enforce your dependence on commercial seed providers. Talk about an abridgment of your freedom to do what you want with what you want. We're not talking about seeds for dangerous or harmful or nuisance plants. We're talking flowers. We're talking food crops. And they're making it illegal for you to harvest and share your own, give them away for free to protect the profitability of the agricultural corporations. And that, of course, is the definition of economic fascism. Over at MIT, another doctor has revealed a link between glyphosate, GMOs, and autism. It may be more than just the toxins in the vaccines. Glyphosate may be a cause of autism. We don't know for sure. Shouldn't we pause the use of glyphosate until we find out for certain? Should we not mandate vaccines until we know for a fact they are 100% safe? More about the vaccines when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about vaccines, vaccine danger. And there's an article over at Natural News, is mass over-vaccination causing polio-like paralysis in children? And we're getting a real dodge on this. This is coming from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. And it's about this so-called mystery disease that seems to follow administration of the polio vaccine. And the mystery disease produces polio-like symptoms, but they're insisting it's not polio. It couldn't be polio. They just had the polio vaccine. Now, we know there was a major problem a few years ago with the oral polio vaccine. It was an attenuated virus vaccine. And once in the body, it reverted to full potency. And it looks like we may have the same thing going on again. But because the CDC's goal is to protect corporate profits over the health of the American people, oh, it's a mystery disease. Really? Another story coming out of Natural News. In the city of Spokane, Washington, member of the city council was told he would be removed from a health panel if he said anything about vaccines other than the official view that vaccines for children should be mandatory. Well, that's certainly the way to get the laws that you want passed, by loading up the panel only with your supporters. They're calling it a vaccine witch hunt, and it really is. They're making huge amounts of money selling medicine to perfectly healthy people who do not necessarily need it. Now, over at Global Research, they've got a story about how one of their local newspapers actually dared to report the fact that vaccine-damaged children are receiving financial compensation from the vaccine court. And so the fact that the vaccine court is acknowledging this damage is out there is a reason to say we need a halt on this stuff. Now, let me share a little anecdotal story with you. Over the weekend, I was playing with my Siri on my iPhone, and I asked, why is software so buggy? Expecting a humorous response, which Siri tends to do. And instead, I got a huge, and I mean a huge list of scholarly articles on why software produced by American software companies is full of bugs and problems. It's unreliable, it's unrobust. And basically concurring that the reason is purely economical. When personal computers were a new industry and fragile, lobbyists from IBM, Apple, and Microsoft asked for and got indemnity from product liability from the United States Congress. What that meant is if you bought a truck for your business and because of a design defect it crashed and your business suffered financial harm, you could sue the truck manufacturer. Still can. However, if you buy a computer system for your business and because of a design defect it crashes and your company suffers financial harm, you cannot sue the computer, hardware, software companies. You ought to read that end user license agreement sometime. This removed the financial incentive from all these companies to produce quality, reliable products. And computer companies inevitably shifted their development from making sure their code actually worked to developing the latest whiz-bang feature to boost sales of next year's new units, leaving us end users to be the unpaid QA division of the company because we're expected to find and report the bugs and problems instead of getting real work done, providing paychecks, which is why we bought these systems in the first place. And the same thing has happened in the vaccine industry because when the Homeland Security Act was passed, there was a rider in there that exempted vaccine manufacturers from product liability under the excuse that vaccine manufacturers had to be free to rapidly develop vaccines in the face of a biological terror attack, which, it should be pointed out, has never happened. But along the way, we have seen products of dubious efficacy and definite harm being foisted on the public, and the public is drawing back and saying, we can't trust this stuff, and instead of investing the time and money and resources to produce a reliable, effective product, the pharmaceutical corporation's answer has been to go to government and say it's now mandatory. We don't care if it doesn't work. We don't care if some of you will suffer harm. You will buy this product because we said so. Because that's how business gets done in the United States these days. Make up a product, make it mandatory. Remember those vapor recovery boots on gasoline nozzles? They don't really work all that well. It sucks the vapor out and just pumps it out the top of the gas station. But they were made mandatory, made filling your car much more difficult, and the people making those systems made a lot of money. And that's exactly what's going on here. They don't want to spend the money to make a safe, reliable vaccine. It's cheaper to bribe Congress to just make it mandatory. And the whole reason for that vaccine court to be there is to head off civil litigation and especially class action lawsuits by taking the cases one at a time and saying, nah, it's all in your head. It's all in your head. And the vast majority of cases before the vaccine court are dismissed. And only when the damage from the vaccine is incredibly obvious will the vaccine court says, yes, you're entitled to some financial compensation. And it's not there to protect the health of you, the American people. It's there to protect the profits of the pharmaceutical corporations. Because our entire medical industrial complex cannot survive in a nation of healthy people. If all Americans were healthy, we were eating right, we were exercising, free from all those chemical contaminants in corporate-produced food, the entire medical industrial complex would collapse. They need us to be constantly, chronically ill. And that's why they turn a blind eye to the harm that food additives can cause or the harm that their medications can cause. Because if they give you a pill and you get an unpleasant side effect, what do? Sell you another pill. Because it makes money. It's all driven by the money. And this, under the weight of this artificially created debt slavery from the private central banks, this drive to always get another piece of ink and paper has destroyed what used to be the best aspects of the American character. We began as a nation of builders and innovators and inventors and pioneers. And today, we've been reduced to just looking under each other's seat cushions for spare change just to make that next payment to the bankers. And that's another reason why we are falling behind the rest of the world. Anyway. Now, last week, Obama issued an executive order regulating the fracking industry. And they made a big deal about it. He's going to get the frackers under control. And it turns out there was a loophole. The White House order is only for fracking that's on public lands. And as they're pointing out, the majority of fracking in California and across the Midwest is taking place on private land, which means the new federal rules don't apply there. In other words, after all the press conference was over and, hey, I'm working to fix the environment, it turns out it's a token effort. It's a symbolic effort at best. And that seems to be all that we get out of the government these days, is symbolic gestures. And as George Carlin used to say, I leave symbols to the symbol-minded. We've had way too much shadow and illusion from our government. We need substance. We need something to actually get done. It's like when Obama was campaigning on hope. I don't want hope. I want somebody who will get the job done. We've had enough hope. For decades, we're hoping for something better. We never get it. As we go into 2016, we need to look at actually finding the candidates who can actually get things done. Stand up to the bankers. Stand up to Israel. Stand up to the corrupting influences. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, please make a point of talking to your friends and family about what's going on, about the real causes for all the wars, about the real cause for the rise of fascism in the United States of America. Tell them about Genesis Communication. Tell them about whatreallyhappened.com. We need to grow our audience, and you can help us do that. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.